My name is Shenzhan Liao. For new friends, welcome. And of course, old friends, it's always great to see you at this monthly Lunch and Learn program at 12 o'clock. I'm sitting at China Institute in New York, Lower Manhattan. My colleague Yang-chou is in another office.
大家好，我是林永强欢迎大家，很高兴在每个月第一个星期五见到大家。
So as usual, can you raise your hand or use the chat, use the function to raise your hand if you are new to our Lunch and Learn program? 小 T 我看见了Annie, Helen. Sorry, there are multiple screens on my computer, so I cannot just exhaust everybody's name, but welcome. If this is the first time to Lunch and Learn, this is the monthly 1-hour program from 12 to 1 o'clock. We read aloud together a Chinese classical poem, and we will go into more detail and writing a Chinese character, and also talk about the etymology, the culture, the content, the history of it. And if it's related to Chinese art, we will take a look at it as well. As many of you know, classical Chinese poems have a long history and so many layers of culture and meanings to decipher. We cannot possibly do that properly and sufficiently in 1 hour, but this is a window into that world. I hope you will enjoy it. So let me just share my screen and we will get to start. 今天我们要读的 some of you may know, 黄鹤楼送孟浩然之广陵 by the great poet in Tang Dynasty, Li Bai. Some of you may know this is the second time we read this poem. I will talk about that a little bit. But to many of you, maybe it's the first time for Lunch and Learn. But I also want to mention this program at China Institute. I see it as an extension of our online Lunch and Learn. It will be on Wednesday, May 18th in the evening of 6:30 to 8 p.m. It's in person. I'm sitting in our library. This program will take place just a few feet away from me. This is a program that would integrate music, poetry reading, and calligraphy, experiential and interactive. We had a winter program last December, just before Omicron started, and it was a great success. So I would love to see many of you in New York to come to this spring literary salon. Lin Lao Shi is going to put maybe he already did, the link for the registration in the chat box. Also, throughout the program today, if you have any questions or comments related to the content, welcome to put it in the chat box. Lin Lao Shi will be the moderator, and we will do our response as possible, as soon as possible. 好的，那我们今天来看看黄鹤楼送孟浩然之广陵. So for language students, 之 here is go to. It's an action word. It's a verb. This is the poem that, for many reasons, I want to do it again this year, since we did it June 2020. Many of you, some of you may have.
I can't. It does.
May you read the program with me at that like 2 years ago, but since we just read a poem by Meng Hao-jan last month, we thought this would be a great poem to revisit, and also it's in the time of spring. This is just such a beautiful poem by the great poet Li Bai, that we can really relate to the season, the friendship, and many other things that we can go into. And I promise that it's going to be our content and approach will be different from the first time. So this poem, written in 730, when Li Bai was at his 20th, and Meng Hao-jan at his early 40s, is the proof that Li Bai and Meng Hao-jan were friends, or at least it appears to be so in this poem, as it's a poem that written by Li Bai for Meng Hao-jan when Meng Hao-jan was on his way to Yang-chou. Yang-chou is the current day name for the city of Guanglin. So in the translation, you could see there is a difference there. And we know that Meng Hao-jan at his early 40s at the time was already famous and admired by many poets at his time, and Li Bai being one of them. I want to talk a little bit about Huanghelou. As last time I mentioned, Huanghelou, the Yellow Crane Pavilion, is a real place, a towering building with beautiful architecture overlooking the Yangtze River. In Chinese, Yangtze River is Changjiang, the long river. It's sitting in the city of Wuhan, which is made world famous by COVID-19 in 2020. But I also want to mention about this building also made Wuhan, the city, famous in Chinese culture because its history, its connection to Chinese literary tradition, and many other cultural traditions. Huanghelou was first built in 223. It was burned down many times. The version we see in this picture was rebuilt in 1980s. We won't know exactly what Huanghelou looked like when Li Bai was there, which floor he will be sitting with Meng Hao-jan for the farewell, if they were together, what kind of drinks they were enjoying at the time. But we know this is one of the most beloved pavilions in China's literary history, as it appears in many poems, possibly because, as you can see in the picture on the right, it was in a strategically important location for people taking the boat along the Yangtze River to move from one point to another, from one city to another, which was the fastest and most popular means of transportation at the time. If it were today, I would imagine Li Bai may just post his poem on Twitter or photo with Meng Hao-jan on Instagram, maybe, which wouldn't end up granting this building such literary and historical significance. We also know that the pavilion carries a lot of cultural weight. Cranes, as appear in this picture on an imperial bowl designed during Yongzheng Emperor's time in early 18th century, is long considered to be representing immortality. So we can see 1, 2, and 3 of them here. And particularly in Taoist legend, cranes are special rights reserved only for immortals, who of course wouldn't travel in boat or horse carriage as humans. I'm just joking on that point. So the Yellow Crane Pavilion, in fact, is an important place for Taoism, as one of its main figures, Lu Dongbing, became immortal here, right on the spot, and as the legend says. Thus, to the Chinese, the name Huanghelou, Yellow Crane Pavilion, lands in layers of meanings. Just by hearing the name, it's related to, connected to history and culture, literary tradition, as well as Taoist connotation. Now, I want to propose a question to the participants today here. Have you ever seen an actual yellow crane? A crane in the color of yellow? Anyone want to unmute yourself and respond?
No,
No.
very rare.
No,
Any bird expert?
No,
No.
No? Okay. Well, indeed, there may be actual yellow crane in nature, but here the word huang, as the color here, yellow, is not descriptive of the crane. Huang is the color of the earth. Also the color reserved for the emperor only in the imperial tradition. The name Huanghe Lou adds to the grandeur, the importance, and its standing between Tian and Di, the heaven and the earth. So we know that every single word in the name itself and also in the poem itself carries a lot of layers of meanings. Now with that, let's take a look at the poem itself. I will read the first time the entire poem. I will invite you to look at the translation as usual. This is, I feel like even explaining or reading it in English, it's quite insufficient to really go into the layers of meaning of this poem, but this is our first or second attempt to understand this poem. So I will read the entire poem for this time, and then we will go into word by word, line by line to read aloud. We will not, unfortunately, have enough time to go into explaining the meaning, so the translation may provide some understanding to get it across. All right, I will start. 黄鹤楼送孟浩然之广陵。
是黄鹤楼送孟浩然之广陵。
故人西辞黄鹤楼，
故人西辞黄鹤楼。
烟花三月下扬州。孤帆远影碧空尽，唯见长江天际流。A heptasyllabic quatrain, 7 characters per line, 4 lines, the entire poem. And we have covered the quatrains in 4 lines or regulated verses in 8 lines. Sometimes the quatrains would be considered as half of the regulated verses. 律诗 and 绝句. Sorry, I have to reverse the order. 绝句 for quatrain, 律诗 for the regulated verses. Now let's go into each line, word by word. I will do twice. The first time, I will pause after each character. You can repeat. Since you're muted, I won't be hearing you, but I hope when we get to the part, I would invite you or everyone to unmute yourself if you like, and I will be able to hear you, even though I know we have quite a group here today, so it may be a little bit messy, but that's expected. All right, so for the first time, 故人西辞黄鹤楼。Now the second time I will do the entire line and pause. 故人西辞黄鹤楼。烟花三月下扬. Sorry, there should be a second tone up here on the letter A. 州烟花三月下扬州. So I want to pause a little bit here. This line is one of the reasons we selected this poem the second time in our program. 烟花三月, just so timely in the lunar month of March. Really, it would be more like April. The cities like Wuhan and Yang-chou along the Yangtze River immersed in the mist, the haze of flowers and trees. With that in mind, you may feel you could just get drunk by picturing the spring there, lively with tenderness, freshness, just like Li Bai enjoying his youth, his talent, his unusual ability to express himself as a poet in this line in such natural grace. That's how I read, and this 烟花三月 would remind me. But of course, by understanding the line, each character, everyone could have maybe slightly different understanding or maybe drastically different understanding. That would be something up for you yourself to feel. But I also want to point out just the musical part of these lines using the first 4 characters and as an example. Gu, it's like falling tone. Ren, rising. Xi, high up there. Ci, so gu ren xi ci, you start from a low tone and then going up high. Gu ren xi ci. So it's sort of like gu ren xi ci. And then verses 烟花三, all of them are high tones. Up, when you read it aloud, it's high pitch up there. 月, falling down. So this is an example of the musical part that in classical Chinese poetry, the rhyme, the tones are, especially in the pairs, they're speaking to each other. They form this cycle that musical to the ear. 故人西辞, 烟花三月, the opposite composition of the notes that would make not only when you understand the meaning that you feel the harmony of the picture, but also the sound itself. So let's just read these 2 lines together. 故人西辞黄鹤楼，烟
故
花
人辞黄鹤楼，
烟花三月下扬州。
烟花三
月
月
下扬州。
好 All right, let's continue. 孤帆远影碧空尽，孤帆远影碧空尽。唯见长江天际流，唯见长江天际流。So that's the entire poem. So now without pinyin, let's do this together. I will invite you to unmute yourself and let's get to the messy part. So again, I will read and then I will pause and we can, I can hear you and maybe we will repeat a few words here and there, but we can read this together a little bit more. Okay. 宋孟浩然之广陵。
宋孟浩然之光临。
Suddenly,
So here, 之, well, it's high up there. Just keep your pitch up there. 之很好。李白，
李白，
故人西辞黄鹤楼。
故人西辞黄鹤楼。
很好。I hear everybody just reading perfectly. Okay. 烟花三月下扬州。
烟花三
月
下扬州。
很好。So just to pay attention to the high pitches, just keep it up there. 烟花三月
烟花
三月
下扬州。
下扬州。
很好。孤帆远影碧空尽。
孤帆远影碧空尽。
好。唯见长江天际流。
唯见长江天际流。
很好。All right. So after this, I just want, because I didn't really do an introduction of Li Bai, but unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Li Bai, but this calligraphy, the only calligraphy work attributed to Li Bai today, maybe can in part serve the purpose. In Chinese, we say 字如其人, 字 characters or written characters. 字如其人, to see the written character is as if to see the person, him or herself, who writes it. Especially in calligraphy, the brushwork indeed captures the very spirit and breath of the calligrapher at the given moment. So this one by Li Bai, if you read from the right to the left vertically, and that's how the flow of the characters go. Just give the impression of how his Li Bai's pretty much in sync with his the style of the poem that he writes naturally, and also showing this kind of talent that can really capture, so skillful, can really capture the essence of the brushwork to express himself. This was, I just want to show the entire piece that's in the Palace Museum in Beijing. It was collected by many emperors and many artists in China's history. As you can see, the stamps all over the pieces. This line, 唐李太白上阳台. These characters written actually by Li Yu, one of the emperors who's also a great calligrapher. We covered his poem, I think last fall, that he created this style that's very stiff, but also shows the strength, which can offer a contrast of Li Bai's style that's maybe so flowy, so showing the free spirit that he wants to express and experience. That's just one example of Li Bai's work. So Li Bai's birth is still a myth, even today. In some narratives, we know he might be from Central Asia, not even in the current territory of China. But he grew up in Sichuan in southwest of China now and traveled extensively. In 742, Li Bai was recognized by the Tang Emperor Xuanzong, whose reign is considered to be the peak of Tang Dynasty. 3 years later, in 744, he wrote this calligraphy work. But in just a little over 10 years after Anlushan Rebellion, which was one of the major military rupture of Tang Dynasty that significantly weakened the empire, Li Bai had to he cannot fly as the crane. He had to flee to the south and serve Prince Yongwang, who was a member of the imperial family, but was later accused of treason. So because of that, Li Bai had to exile himself again, but was eventually pardoned by the emperor. So however, his poems rarely reflected all the ups and downs in life. Just like the one we read, his poem carries the breath of nature so effortlessly as if he's out of the world. And by reading that, we as the reader may be transported just for a moment to be out of the world as well. While he's not the only poet who was able to achieve this, many before Li Bai, such as Meng Hao-jan, Li Bai admired, or Tao Yuanming, we read his poem from Southern Dynasty, 300, 400 AD, really started a genre that's very similar in this direction. But Li Bai is no doubt the crown jewel, and only Li Bai was given the title of Shi Xian, the poet celestial, in China's literary history as we know now. So that's a little bio of Li Bai. There are so many books written about him, and he's also, well, many of the poems that he collected in Quan Tang Shi, the complete compile of Tang, the anthology of Tang poems that was compiled in Qing Dynasty, 16th or 17th century. But well, he's perhaps one of the most known poets in China, as well as in the Western study of Chinese classical poetry. So I just feel by revisiting his poem that's so timely to the season today, we can reintroduce him to our series. So now let's read this poem one more time. I would invite Lin Laoshi, Yongchang Lin Laoshi, to lead the reader aloud. How about that? Lin Laoshi?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you please?
好. So everyone, please join me to read it together. 一起读. 宋孟浩然之广陵。
宋孟浩然之广陵。
李白。很好。故人西辞黄鹤楼。烟花三月。下扬州。孤帆远影。碧空尽。唯见长江。
为
见
见
长
江天际流。
天际
流。
很好 ，OK. So let's read it together one more time. So line by line. OK. So ready 开始。送孟浩然之广陵。
送孟浩然之广陵。
李白。故人西辞黄鹤楼。
故人
西
辞
黄鹤楼。
好，烟花三月下扬州。
烟花三月
下扬州。
扬州。
扬州。
很好。孤帆远影碧空尽。
孤帆远
影碧空尽。
唯见长江天际流。
唯见长江天际流。
Okay, 很好。So let's try one more time, maybe a little bit harder. So I will read 2 lines together and then you see if you can repeat it 2 lines one time. Okay, ready? 准备开始。送孟浩然之广陵。
宋孟浩然之广陵。
李白。Okay, 2 lines one time. So 故人西辞黄鹤楼，烟花三月下扬州。
故人西辞黄鹤楼，烟花三月下扬州。
非常好。孤帆远影碧空尽，唯见长江天际流。
孤帆远影碧空尽，唯见长江天际流。
Yeah， 不错，很好。碧空尽。
碧空尽。
天际流。
天际流。
很好，很好。Yeah.
Thank you, Yongqiang. Thank you, Lin 老师. I see Marilyn raised your hand. 你有问题吗？
有问题。
Uh-huh.
Could you tell us again what kind of poem this is? Because I'm interested that the verb in each line is not parallel. These are not couplets.
Indeed, very good, Marilyn. You are definitely have studied the quatrains and the regulated verses. This is a quatrain. This is, let me just go back. It's a heptasyllabic quatrain, but the 2 lines typically, so let me go back to here. So typically, the quatrain or regulated verses, they follow a certain pattern that, well, you would have a kind of parallelism in the 2 lines that are a pair. So in this case, the first line and the second line are a pair. The third and the fourth are a pair. And in the parallelized pattern, the type of the part of the speech, the word should be either complement each other or opposite each other. But in the case of quatrain, it actually has different ways of organizing that parallelized, or in this case, not parallelized.
Yes.
So you could be not parallelized, but still form a quatrain. So it actually has, there are different versions. It could be the first and the second non-parallelized, the third and fourth parallelized. It could be none of them are parallelized, But yeah, in this case, none of them are parallelized. It's not the golden rule to judge whether it's a good quatrain or in the regulated verse. But in regulated verse, the 8 lines, you have to have the 3rd and 4th, the 5th and the 6th to be parallelized. In the part of speech, in the that was more strictly regulated. In the case of quatrain, or sometimes it's called half of the 律诗, half of the regulated verse, it does not have to follow.
半律吗? What do you call half regulated in Chinese?
Well, we still call it 绝句.
Oh,
It's just, yeah, it's 绝句就好像半首律诗 because it's 4 lines. Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about the verbs though? You see, that's what's so interesting in this quatrain.
Mm-hmm.
词, it's very unusual to see this. I mean, you can see 词 as leaving something or going away or what, but here it's in the middle, and then in the next line the verb is in 下扬州. So, and then in the line after that the verb is at the very end. 毕恭敬.
Exactly.
And then in the final line you have 2 verbs, 为见, 长江天际流, at the very end. I mean, it's really interesting form, isn't it?
It is, and it is Li Bai. It is also why this is, you're absolutely right. The part of speech in this poem, they're not parallelized. So you see them in different locations of this poem. 词 is to say goodbye, farewell. And 下 is another one, the verb, go to, and especially follow the flow of the Yangtze River from the upper Yangtze River where Wuhan is to the lower Yangtze River where Yang-chou is. That's the reason 下 is like going down, following the flow of the Yangtze River. And 尽 here is to be exhausted, to disappear. So you have that lone sail that you can only see the shadow in the far away and disappear in the blue sky, the end of the blue sky. And then 流 and 见 is you can only see the long river, the water that flow towards the edge of the world, basically. So this form is unusual in its non-parallelized style. And it's by no means that, well, I can really find another poem that the part of speech all over different places, but it's really flowing so nicely in terms of the rhyme, in terms of the sound, that for example, to me, when I read this, I can barely notice that there's any disruption in terms of, wow, the non-parallelized part of this form. Yeah.
My question also is, the fact that it's so free, does it have anything to do with the fact that the more strictly regulated poems came later and that he's relatively early, or does it not have? I mean, how early were strictly regulated form part of the exam system, or then what was considered? I'm not asking whether it's good or bad. I'm just asking about how strict this form was followed and by whom. I mean, among practicing poets.
Right. So I have two points to share. One is at Li Bai's time, the not necessarily regulated verse, but the classical poems were already part of the imperial examination. Wu Zetian, who was the empress before Li Bai, at least 2 or 3 emperors before Li Bai's time, she made it a rule that everyone attending the imperial examination had to be able to present, to be able to write classical poetry. So that, in fact, historically giving a big reason for classical poetry, especially regulated verses, to be thriving later, and especially during Tang Dynasty time. So when during Li Bai's time, that's already in practice. So there are many great regulated verses following the parallelism and more strict rules to come up with great poems. And think of that, the more rules, of course, it's more difficult to write a great poem following the rules and sound greatly, and also deliver the kind of meanings and the imagery that the poets want to express while carrying a free flow or out of the world or natural grace. So it's extremely difficult to do that. And that's also many reasons that a lot of regulated verses, especially, for example, what Du Fu, later younger than Li Bai, and we feel a very different, great poems, but very different style compared to Li Bai's poem. Another point is Li Bai is known, in fact, to write a lot of poems of Gufeng, the old form, the kind of poems that's before Tang Dynasty that follows the antiquity style that has coming from Chu Ci or Shi Jing or even Han Dynasty, the old poems. We in fact read one of Gu Shi Shi Jiu Shou from the southern dynasties that you can see it's similar. You have 5 characters or 7 characters, but those were not regulated verses. It follows more of a free flow. So this poem by Li Bai, who's that like more of following that old form other than the quatrain. But this poem, in many of the literatures that I came across, or attributed it to a quatrain, a 绝句, instead of an old form poem. Because I was wondering that myself as well. By looking at it, it's like not necessarily following that 2 pairs, strictly the verb to verb or noun to noun, those kind of composition, whether this should be considered as a 古诗 instead of a 绝句. So I would like to move forward. We have a writing part. I know there are quite a few hands raised. If you could put your question in the chat box, we will get to it either through emails or at the end of the session. I have to apologize. I have another meeting uptown. I have to jump on the train right after this at 1 o'clock. So we are a little bit short on time for this session. Typically, we would love to stay for more minutes after 1 o'clock to address other questions, but this time maybe we can reserve for emails. Just let me get to the writing part, which is I really love the character we are choosing this time. And we know this character B as in 孤帆远影碧空尽. Of course, in English translation, it's the blue sky, the color blue there. But let's take a look at its earlier form.
Oh, how?
Which this is the form that was almost 2,000 years ago, also from Xu Shen's 说文解字 Eastern Han Dynasty. Not a lot of transformation, as you can see. And what's the original meaning of this character B? And we can easily see there are three parts here, right? There are two parts on the top, the left and the right, and then the bottom part here, holding up the two parts on the top, and the bottom part, 石, it's by itself a character. It's very pictographic. It's the stone. It's the stone. It looks like a stone. If you draw a picture of a stone, maybe this one would remind you. Very pictographic. Now, the top left part, the old form from, this is really from oracle bones. Oh, by the way, this bottom part, it's from the bronze script, those carved on bronzes. That's what we saw a couple of sessions ago. And this one is from oracle bones. I would invite you, this maybe requires a little bit more imagination, because, well, it's similar to this one, because over more than maybe even hundreds or 1,000 years at Xu Sheng's time, this transformed to this form. But what does this represent? So have you, yeah, many of you, I would invite you to picture, you may have seen those necklaces made in prehistoric civilizations that's made of pieces of stones, all kinds of stones. It could be the limestone, it could be some crystals, it could be many other materials, but in the form of like either cylinders or circles or little pieces, round or in different shapes of roundness, but with a circle in the middle and with the a kind of a thread to go through the circle. So picturing that, these are the pieces, especially those thin layers with the circle in the middle. And then this is the thread going through. So this is something made of the stone, and it's a jade. On the top right hand side, this one by itself, many of you can recognize. What does it mean?
Bai, it's white.
Bai, 对的, Bai. So this is a very interesting character. I'm afraid I don't have a lot of time to go into that, but Bai, now we know it's the name of color. In this character, in this case, Xu Sheng's explanation, the writer of the first book on Chinese etymology in about 100 AD, and his explanation is this is representing the sound of this character. Now we say it's Bai, and this character's pronunciation is Bi, very close, especially thinking of the ancient time. So we know that in the character, in the way of creating Chinese characters, at least in Xu Sheng's time, in about 2,000 years ago, it's already a practice that one part of the character can represent the sound, not so much necessarily related to the meaning of the character. But in this case, just to finish on that, in today's characters, for example, we say 形声字. If you learn many Chinese characters, you know that some of the characters, one part of the character actually is representing the sound. So if you encounter a character, you don't know the pronunciation, you may have a good guess, maybe 50% would be right, or a little more than 50% would be right if you can recognize one part of the character and you guess the pronunciation of the entire character would be following that. That's 形声字. So this one, in this case, I also feel the meaning later, Bai means white, and also oftentimes associated with clean. clear and pure. So the character here, B, the meaning is the beautiful stone that actually carries a color of greenish or bluish. There's any shades in between. Remember the character qing, as we learned before. And this color is also similar to that, but this is also coming from a precious, beautiful stone. That's B. So I have later B, this character more refers to the color, the greenish, bluish color, as in 碧空镜. Before we get to the writing part, I just want to share the actual B, the Jade B. This one was exhibited at China Institute Gallery, in fact, 2017. And the Jade B is particularly this style, that round with a round circle in the middle and with beautiful carvings surrounding as the design. And this one is particularly, look at the color. B as a color, in especially in ancient time, rarely refers to bright green, that kind of sort of giving you almost a surprise kind of green color, but it's more subtle, it's more subdued, and it's more appreciated in Chinese culture, especially in traditional sense. However, the Jade B itself doesn't necessarily mean it has to be green nowadays, or even ancient time. This is a white B. So you can comes with different colors as well. Even though the original meaning of the word B is the beautiful stone as jade in green color, but later on, the jade itself can have the Jade B itself can have different colors, and this word B is specifically reserved for the color of greenish, bluish, but beautiful and with a lot of cultural meanings in Chinese tradition. So now I would get to the writing part. I would ask Lin Laoshi to spotlight my other camera that I would show the, I have to stop sharing, right?
Yes.
I would stop sharing and I would show, I always use this brush right here, right? So let me just, so it has a sort of like soft tip on the top, but if you have any pen at hand, any paper, I just want to, we can, I'm not a calligrapher, but let's go to the writing part of it as well. We just mentioned 字如其人. We write the characters whether in brush or not. The line itself captures you yourself at this moment. So if you agree, let's get to the practice. So let me stop my video and get your paper ready. So can you see clearly? So let's do, I will do the old form, which now we call it 小篆, the seal style, first. And we probably only have time for that one. But so I will start from the top left. the first line on the top for the jade part. This is a jade. It's another piece of jade. Then the thread. And then another piece. Now I would do the right, the top right, the bai part. So by the way, bai is connected to the direction of the west. If you remember the ancient form of bai, to me, it feels like a sagging song, meaning when the sun is setting down in the west, the color is no longer bright. It's turning into something whitish that you can look at. And that's the color of bai. And that's one reason the color of bai is actually representing the direction of the west. And in Chinese tradition, 5 major colors are all connected to the directions. So, and you know that the direction in the middle representing the earth, and you know the color for that one already. So writing and speaking is not good, because in this case, I cannot hold my one breath together. And that would affect how I write the character. Yeah. So this is B. And I will quickly do the current form, which is very similar. That's the regular style, 楷书. So in 楷书, the last is like a tick. And then also this is like a short, slanted 撇. And then make this a little square. And then this line is holding up like a solid stone. And then there you go. Yeah. So the 楷书, the bottom part, actually, I had too much space in here. It feels a little not, to me, it feels not compact enough. But yeah, that's worth taking practice. And that's the writing part today. And so, Lin Laoshi has already put the registration line for next May. It's also a Friday, lunchtime, the first Friday of May. So again, apologize that I have to run, and maybe bring your question to email us, or save it for next time. I promise we will have more time after 1 o'clock to chat more freely. So it's good. 谢谢 Eric， 谢谢大家。Yeah,
谢谢。
谢谢。
it's really wonderful to see everyone here every month.
各位老师非常感谢。
谢谢老师。
谢谢，再见。
再见。